Welcome to the Detroit Regional Chamber's third installment of Lessons in Leadership. I'm Tammy Carnwright, the Chief Operating Officer for the Chamber. Lessons in Leadership is a virtual series that will offer emerging leaders from business, government, civic organizations the opportunity to hear from experienced leaders about their leadership journey. I would invite you that DetroitChamber.com has the past Lessons in Leadership series if you missed them. So I encourage you to go to the website and look at the other leaders who have been with us so far. But right now, I want to introduce someone very important who makes this series of Lessons in Leadership possible. I'd like to introduce Tiffany Douglas, who is the Market Executive, Detroit Local Markets Organization for Bank of America. Bank of America is hosting all of these sessions for us. So Tiffany, welcome.
Tammy, thanks so much. And it's so good to be with you today. We want to say thanks to the Chamber for offering these phenomenal engagements that allow us to discuss and share what we've seen and been through for the last year as they shape how we go forward. Again, I am Tiffany Douglas, and I'm proud to serve our community here in Metro Detroit for Bank of America, helping to support our clients and communities to thrive. Recently, Tammy, you know, we've announced a major initiative of $1.25 billion to drive economic opportunity and racial equality to help build thriving communities. And as we go about doing those investments, partnerships from leaders and civic and corporate and government and private sector from all across our economic spectrum is really, really important. So these kinds of discussions help us to do that. We know that also small and medium-sized businesses help us to drive our economy, and that kind of engagement using great leaders like Peter Quigley, who's joining us today, and the others that we've heard from really help us to share those experiences. And so we're pleased to be a partner here. As we go about our day-to-day business to improve financial lives and drive responsible growth, we want to thank you, Tammy, and everyone at the Chamber for helping us to navigate these crazy times. And as we go forward to something better and we emerge out of what we've come from, we hope that we'll all be safe and better positioned to help support a thriving Metro Detroit, a thriving Michigan, because as our community goes, so does this nation. And so conversations about lessons in leadership is great. So although we can't learn from other people's mistakes, we can certainly learn from their experiences. So this is a great one and another awesome opportunity to learn. So Tammy, thanks so much for having us. I want to thank all my teammates at Bank of America for staying the course and being on that front line. So back to you.
Thank you, Tiffany, and please thank your team on behalf of the Detroit Regional Chamber also for always being so supportive of all of our efforts.
Thank you.
So today I have the privilege of speaking with Peter Quigley. He's President and Chief Executive Officer of Kelly. They are a global leader in workforce management and staffing solutions based right here in Troy, Michigan. Peter has been at Kelly since 2004 and was named President and CEO in October of 2019. Kelly has a unique perspective on talent and workforce as it identifies and recruits people, connecting them to employers with workforce needs. Peter's been a longtime champion of improving economic equity and reducing systemic barriers to employment, so that the labor market is more equitable and accessible to all people. Additionally, the Chamber is pleased that Peter is a member of the Chamber's Board of Directors, and he also chairs our CEO Talent Council. So he gives us many different contributions in many ways. So Peter, thank you so much for speaking with me today and with the Detroit Regional Chamber audience.
Thank you, Tammy. It's great to be with you. For those of you who aren't familiar with Kelly, we're a talent company. It provides the world's best organizations with scientists, engineers, educators, contact center agents, light industrial workers, and many other types of talent that companies need to grow and compete. We've been in the business of connecting people with work for a long time. As Tammy mentioned, our founder pioneered the staffing industry right here in Detroit in 1946, which makes this our 75th year in business. I've been with Kelly for close to 20 of those years, the last year and a half serving as president and CEO. And Kelly was a natural work home for me because I believe deeply in the power and dignity of work, which is why we provide, which is what we provide for hundreds of thousands of people around the world each year. To illustrate what I mean, I'll share a story about the impact of work on one woman's life. Her name is Amy, a stay-at-home mom of 4 children, ages 14 to 6. Amy had never worked outside the home when, unexpectedly, her husband of 17 years left the family with a mortgage and more debt than money. As you can imagine, Amy's whole world was turned upside down. She had to sell their home and rent an older house across town. She borrowed money from friends and family to put food on the table and search for jobs to make ends meet. Before long, she cobbled together part-time work, and as she gained skills and experience, she made her way to steady work. She knew things were getting better when her youngest child, her second grade son, no longer needed financial assistance to buy his school lunches. Eventually, she earned her real estate license and used her selling experience to join a small merchandising firm, earning a living wage for the family. And best of all, she found joy and meaning in her work. This is the kind of story about work enriching people's lives that we see every day at Kelly, and why I'm so proud of Kelly's purpose of connecting people to work. And while it could be, the story isn't about a Kelly employee. The story is about my mother, Amy Quigley. And I'm the second grader in the story with a distinct memory of being the only kid in class to pay for lunch with a special ticket. My mother showed me, by example, the transformative power of work. Her employment at a time when men dominated the workforce brought our family opportunity and hope. And it certainly changed the trajectory of her life and consequently mine. I'm fortunate and deeply grateful for my mother's hard work. This backstory is why I'm so passionate about the power of work, opportunity for everyone who wants to work, and about dismantling barriers to work, like my mother faced when breaking into the workforce as a woman in the 1960s and 70s. So when the Chamber invited me to speak to you today about my perspectives on diversity, equity, and inclusion, I was happy to come share my thoughts as a leader because it's something I care about deeply. Now, being a CEO during the last year and a half has certainly had its challenges, to say the least, but I wouldn't give it up because I've grown and learned so much as a leader by working alongside my colleagues and genuinely connecting with them during our society's prolonged struggle stemming from the pandemic, and also importantly, the racial awakenings of the last year or so. My time listening to my coworkers who've had different life experiences than mine, many frankly heartbreaking and profound, resulted in a permanent mind shift for me. Those conversations helped me understand that it was upon me, upon all leaders, to purposely do the work to create and nurture a culture of inclusion and belonging, which also means actively combating exclusion or inequity of any kind. And while DEI work was on my personal must-do list when I stepped into the CE role 6 months before the murder of George Floyd, a firm stance on equity inclusion within the walls of Kelly and more broadly in the labor market needed to be taken, like now, right now. And it needs to be much broader than checking boxes for diverse headcount. I'm convinced the right thing to do is proactively create spaces where everyone feels welcome in the workforce and experience a true sense of belonging at work. So, in an effort to make this massive subject a little more digestible, I'll approach DE&I today in terms of 4 W's: workforce, workplace, work time, and work style. So workforce, or who does the work, is what many of us naturally think of when we consider DE&I. And I won't belabor the point when it comes to business performance. The research is very clear. Diversity improves business results. We can't be thinking big or unlocking innovation or anticipating alternative solutions to problems when we're all the same. Diversity makes us smarter and more creative. The author Catherine Phillips says, diversity jolts us into cognitive action in ways that homogeneity simply does not. And while many organizations have done a decent job improving the representation aspects of a diverse workforce, quantitative improvement, The more telling question is answering how they've done from a qualitative standpoint. Who sits in the most important P&L roles? Who is in the leader's inner circle? Who gets tapped on the shoulder for the high profile assignment? Or who gets differentiated information to help them succeed? That's why I'm so proud that women make up half my leadership team, and they run 3 of our 5 operating units or P&Ls. I'm also pleased that more than a quarter of my leaders are ethnically diverse, and more than a quarter were born outside the US. And 40% of our board members are women or ethnically diverse. The second W is workplace, in a literal sense, where work gets done. And while there was a clear trend of expanding definition of workplace before the pandemic, COVID-19 has been in many ways a mass experiment that showed us that work output is far more important than work location. We saw firsthand that many types of work can be done from dining room tables, bedroom offices, a second home, or anywhere the internet can reach. One of Kelly's call center agents, Brandy, works from her cattle ranch in Montana. And 2 other Kelly employees, Elizabeth and Tammy, work from their RV as they travel the country. Those are compelling and interesting examples that stoke our imagination and highlight the notion that we can and should explore the idea that work can be done in places that allow us to be our best selves. Expanding where work can be done can be a game changer for those who have challenges with transportation or mobility. When we say some types of work can be done anywhere and we welcome these individuals to the workplace, we enable a wider and potentially more diverse funnel of talent. And while these possibilities are exciting, I believe the workplace is much more than a physical space. It's also about the sense of community, belonging, and inclusion. The recipe is not add diversity and mix. We have to proactively foster a culture of inclusion and create the conditions where people can bring their best and whole selves to work. One way we've made some strides with this at Kelly is launching employee resource groups we call Affinity Groups. Since becoming CEO, our employees have formed 6 active affinity groups open to identifying employees and their allies. I'm personally engaged with these groups and have seen firsthand the sense of belonging and community they create. Moving to the next W, we have work time, which is when work gets done. And let's just start with the admission that an uninterrupted 8 or 9 hour stretch of time to work between the hours of 8 in the morning and 5 or 6 at night is in many cases an antiquated concept. And for those of us who have that option, a privilege. Many of us, I'd venture to say most of us, encountered disruptive responsibilities at some point in our lives. And we have to do a better job of making the workforce inclusive of these individuals by expanding the idea of when work can be done and displaying genuine empathy for that employees are whole people who likely have obligations outside work. One unfortunate, if not tragic, result of the pandemic is the mass exodus of women from the workforce, many of whom aren't coming back. While indicative of several issues, this tells me that employers have collectively not done enough to offer flexibility and empathy to retain the working mothers who took on the brunt of virtual school teaching and caregiving responsibilities during this pandemic. This trend is most pronounced for women of color and is far-reaching enough to extend to women in senior leadership and to show up in fewer women applying for placement in management positions. As a society, we're being incredibly short-sighted to lose the progress we've made over the past several decades for women in the workplace because of a temporary crisis. We must do more. In addition, flexibility in work time allows for greater upward mobility for those who wish to pursue upskilling, credentialing, or higher education opportunities that often conflict with a traditional 9-to-5 schedule. Work done at 9 a.m. or 9 p.m. can be both brilliant and valuable. Finally, we have work style, which is how work is done. For many of us, the experience of work during the pandemic reduced our dependency on antiquated work style norms. We realized that a lot of the things that may have seemed important before, the formality of what we wear to work, how close we are to our boss's office, or other symbols of hierarchy, seem much less important than they used to. During the pandemic, we became more familiar with one another, each other's partners, children, pets, and homes. We went through a prolonged struggle together and hopefully built a sense of connection, empathy, and shared human experience. we began dismantling the notion that we need to bring our work self to work and leave our whole self in the parking lot. I hope this more welcoming work style, where we feel free to bring our whole selves to work, is a lasting legacy of COVID-19. It makes work much more enjoyable and welcoming, and teams much better connected and thereby stronger. So thinking inclusively about those 4 W's, workforce, workplace, work time, and work style, especially now as we begin to emerge from the life-altering experience of the pandemic, is a way to make the dignity and power of work within reach for far more people than ever before, and make the experience of work more humane, rewarding, and joyful. Yet as leaders, it's not enough to simply understand and talk concepts. We must act. Kelly was founded on creating greater access to work for women following the Second World War, when male soldiers returned home and displaced women in Detroit from their work supporting America's war effort, work that many of them had come to enjoy, value, and possibly depend on. Our company was born out of giving this underappreciated talent pool an opportunity to work, seek independence, and build a sense of dignity. That's our legacy, and we deeply believe that our society thrives when people who want to work are given that opportunity. During our many decades in the very center of the talent supply and demand equation, something has become obvious to us. Far too many capable people, including people of color and people from other underrepresented communities, are excluded from the workforce because of rarely challenged hiring practices, outdated societal constructs, and systemic inequities. Barriers that prevent the roughly 1 in 3 American adults with a criminal history from finding work. Barriers that discriminate against neurodiverse talent, resulting in 85% of college-educated adults on the autism spectrum remaining unemployed. Barriers that hold back those who don't have the resources to pursue a 4-year degree. And sadly, that list goes on, disproportionately impacting people from underrepresented communities. It needs to stop. These barriers leave capable people who want to work excluded, the dignity of work unfairly out of reach. To shine a light on these injustices, late last year, Kelly launched Equity at Work, which is aimed at, one by one, dismantling unjust barriers to meaningful work. Hard work has to start at home. So at Kelly, we recently updated our hiring policy around minor drug offenses. And right now we're wrapping up a case study with a large customer that shows the incredible power of giving people with nonviolent criminal records a second chance. Overall, the interest in engagement in equity at work within Kelly and in the market has been incredible. Some of the most meaningful and rewarding work of my career. I believe as leaders, we owe it to humankind to get this right and make work not just about making a living for some, but making a life of dignity and joy for all. If I have one piece of advice to leave you with, a lesson in leadership, it's to think about a 5th and final W. Why? Why embark on a journey to bring greater equity, inclusion, and belonging to your organization? My why is my personal experience seeing what opportunities can do for people. How my mother went from facing poverty as a single mother at age 40 to many years later proudly buying that home she had to rent when my father abruptly left. And how a boy who had to pay for his lunch with those special tickets could one day have the honor of running a company that connects people to work in ways that enrich their lives. My childhood experience left me with 2 indelible beliefs that I hold dear. That the dignity of work, rooted in human dignity, is sacred. And that women, and by extension, other marginalized communities, have a place, and an important one, in the workplace. When we feel deeply that equity, inclusion, and belonging is the right thing in our hearts, and our why is clear, the hard work to bring about change will follow. Thank you for listening, for your time today, and now I look forward to a conversation with Tammy and taking your questions.
Peter, thank you so much. There's a lot in there that I would love to touch on a little more. Plus, I have some of my own questions, but I have to say, listening to you bring in human stories was really special. And I think that helps others to understand the importance of other people's lives as it relates to work and equity. So thank you for those comments.
Thank you, Tammy.
So I want to just continue on a couple of the things that you mentioned. So you mentioned that Kelly has affinity groups. Do you mind sharing a little bit more on what they are and how they're managed?
Not at all. Be happy to. So the 6 affinity groups we have are in Asia and Pacific Islander group, a Black Leaders and Allies at Kelly called Black. We have a group of women, a Women's Alliance. We have a Latinx group. We have a Rainbow Alliance, which supports our LGBTQ plus community. And we have a millennial group, which is known as Emerge. And all of these groups were created by Kelly employees who got like-minded individuals together and organized charters and game plans for how they were going to operate, elected boards or officers. Each of them has an executive sponsor, so that would be either me or a member of my leadership team that works with the leaders of the affinity group. And they've already done some really, really powerful work, not only within the communities that they most closely associate with, but also in creating greater awareness about the challenges that underrepresented communities face and the importance of creating allies that understand more deeply the challenges that individuals face and how we can, as a community, support them. So it's been a very, they're off to a really good start. And while we have 6 today, who knows how many we might have in another year or so.
So if there are other companies who are listening who would like to do the same with affinity groups, what would be your advice on how to get started?
Well, I would, by all means, begin talking to your employees about the interests that they might have in creating. Ultimately, it's the passion and the willingness of leaders to commit their time and energy to an affinity group that makes them successful. So that first and foremost is tapping into the talent and finding whether there is that level of passion and commitment. I would encourage companies to talk to other companies that have stood up resource groups or affinity groups. I know at Kelly, we talked to a number of other companies in the chamber about what their experiences were and how they got the organization started, how they're funding them, what kind of cadence do they put on communications, all of which was incredibly valuable because there are, as you know, Tammy, among the membership, some amazing companies and some that have done some really good, powerful work in this area. And as fellow members, certainly tap into that expertise when possible. And I'm happy to put anybody in contact with not only the folks here at Kelly, but also the folks that we talked to before standing up these affinity groups.
And you've done a great job of helping the chamber back also with your staff who is so devoted to DE&I. So we thank you for that extra support.
Yeah, thanks, Tammy.
So when I mentioned the human element of your remarks earlier, you mentioned connecting and listening with Kelly employees about their struggles over the last year. How did those conversations come about?
Well, in case of the pandemic, I undertook a fairly regimented and regular series of communications with our employees about how they were tolerating the situation, what they needed from the company, how we could support them. We made adjustments to our policies around creating greater flexibility, as I mentioned, around work time, because so many, especially working parents, but I think others who had caregiving responsibilities were struggling with how to cope with the pandemic. And there was just an encouragement for our colleagues to reach out to each other and support one another and provide greater flexibility and room for the peculiarities of the situation we found ourselves in. In terms of the racial awakenings of the last year, which has probably been one of the most profound impacts on me as a person, after the murder of George Floyd, I sent an email, probably not taking a page out of the classic corporate playbook of not getting involved in societal issues. But I sent an email to all of our employees expressing my outrage, my intense outrage at the situation that we saw unfold on that horrible day in Minneapolis. And the reaction was overwhelming. And frankly, it was inspiring because I had so many colleagues reach out to me, not only to say thank you for standing up for what is right, but for the opportunity to talk to me directly and share their experiences with me. And these are individuals that I have worked side by side, many of them, for almost 20 years. But to hear them talk about their personal experience with racism and how it impacted not only their parents, but their kids and their brothers and sisters, it was awakening for me. And I always considered myself to be a thoughtful and objective and fair and open-minded leader. But these conversations revealed to me that I had more work to do to truly understand the challenges that so many of our underrepresented communities struggle with every day, each day. And so it was a very powerful, and it continues to be to this day, as after the Derek Chauvin verdict, we set up some listening sessions for our employees who needed space and wanted to share what they were feeling. And those have been incredibly well received because they create a safe space for people to talk about things that probably a year and a half ago wouldn't have been a topic of conversation during work. And I think it's creating a greater sense of community and creating greater engagement of the people that aren't underrepresented, people like me, you know, white males who may think we're doing a good job, but until you really roll up your sleeves and start talking about it and trying to understand, we still have a lot of work to do.
Well, it's very impressive considering the size of your organization that you executed in that way. You know, I would expect that from a smaller business or a medium-sized business, but as large as your organization is, that's truly very, very impressive. Especially when you think that you employ, I think it's over 400,000 people around the world. How are you able to manage and lead such a large and disparate organization?
So the 400,000 is a little misleading, Tammy, because that's the number of people we put to work every year. But our full-time workforce is quite a bit smaller than that.
Okay.
But it's still a large organization. But it's an important number to share because we do reach 400,000 people, and it's
Sure.
among that community that we see these unjust barriers being put up in front of many of them because of antiquated notions of employment or qualifications that we are, through equity at work, trying to address. And each time we're able to put somebody in a job that they might otherwise not have qualified for, because we're able to convince one of our customers that there's an individual that deserves to work because they want to and they can make a contribution, it's a great day. And fortunately, more and more of those 400,000 are people from those communities that maybe a couple of years ago even might not have been able to find that opportunity. And I think we can all agree, putting politics aside, Tammy, that when you put somebody to work that wants to work, it's good for them, it's good for their families, it's good for their communities, and ultimately it's good for the economy. So, we're looking for other like-minded organizations to join with us. And I know the Chamber is fully behind our efforts to try to create more opportunities for individuals. But it has to come under an umbrella, our equity at work. But it happens one person at a time. So it is something that we all need to be invested in.
So along that line of thinking, it's clear from listening to you that you recognize leadership does not just come from the top down. So what steps do you take to foster leadership at every level within an organization?
Well, I think it actually starts with listening to every part of the organization. When I moved back into operations a couple of years ago, I made a program that you may know the movie Quigley Down Under, but I launched a program called Quigley All Over because I wanted to get out of the headquarters building and spend as much time as possible with our customers, with the front line, with people who are leaders in their own right, but are going to be our future leaders, and listening to them and understanding their challenges, letting them know that I care deeply about their work experience and their life experience is so meaningful to me as a leader, and it starts there. So I now have access to what's on people's minds, and when they hear me talk, whether it's to an investor or a group like this or to an all-employee broadcast, I draw on those leaders for much of my inspiration. And so listening and then empowering people. People are remarkable creatures, and given the authority to find new ways of doing things and acting with creativity and unleashing their potential is a transformative thing. And I think too many in corporate America still rely on, I think, an antiquated sort of sense of hierarchy and command and control. And I haven't solved this problem, Tammy, so I don't have all the answers, but I do think that empowering people to bring their best selves to work every day and their whole self to work every day and creating a sense of belonging for them is a very powerful tool that we're unpacking and learning how to apply.
So you and I were talking a little earlier about COVID-19 and return to work. Many businesses throughout Michigan and around the US are starting to return in-person work again after 15 months of COVID-19. How have you seen COVID-19 impacting the work and the workplace?
Well, it's clearly having a significant impact. As mentioned during my remarks, I think there's been a generational change in a sense of work location is potentially less important than work outcome, which I think is an incredibly powerful realization if you think about whether individuals who might not have been recruited because they didn't live within 50 miles of a company's headquarters now all of a sudden could be eligible for work because their job can be done remotely. So I think that's a huge and important change. I think the work style and the workplace are going to be much more tolerant of people's whole selves. And this sort of, there's a place for that, but not at work, I think is a notion that's probably been challenged during the pandemic. And I'm glad to see that it's been challenged because I think work is more enjoyable when people are allowed to be themselves and feel like they belong notwithstanding whatever life situation they find themselves in.
Mhm.
There
Right.
are going to be significant impacts as a result of automation that has been introduced during the pandemic. And
Mm.
I think that as a community, whether it's here in Southeast Michigan, but in all communities, I think we need to take a really serious look at how we help upskill and reskill our talent, because as we introduce more and more automation, I think we run the risk of leaving more and more people behind. And given the commitment of employers and employees and local education institutions and government, like right here in Michigan, we've got all those ingredients. We've just got to figure out a way to put the recipe together so that everybody benefits. And I think that's hopefully something that will come out of the pandemic, will be a greater attention on upskilling and reskilling.
So taking off from that, you're leading the Chamber's CEO Talent Council, and you've been instrumental in the Detroit Regional Compact. And let me say to our participants who are listening, if you don't know this, the Chamber has a very important strategy of achieving post-secondary attainment, 60% post-secondary attainment by the year 2030 for our region to catch us up with the rest of the United States. So from a leadership perspective, Peter, why is it so important to foster education and talent acquisition opportunities?
Well, I think the day of learning a job and then being able to perform that job for a decade or 3 decades is long gone. With the advent of technology advances, AI, we are going to need to evolve, or evolve may be too slow. We need to get to a environment in which continuous learning and relearning and upskilling and reskilling is part of the job. And that can't be done because an employee wants to do it. It's got to be a compact between the employer and the employee and local educational institutions and government, philanthropies, to focus on the needs of the community to create an educated and versatile workforce. And that's something that the Talent Compact, as well as the work we're doing on the CEO Talent Council, is designed to accelerate. Because as you mentioned, in Southeast Michigan, we are behind the curve here. And recent trends announced by Sandy at the recent State of Education would suggest we're not making the kinds of strides we need to. So leaders in organizations need to buy into this notion that we're all benefit from a more educated, better trained, more flexible workforce. And it doesn't, I'm very supportive of 4-year degrees, but it doesn't have to just be a 4-year degree. There are other means of credentialing and associate's degrees and other certifications that qualify people to get on either a different rung on the ladder or maybe get on a different ladder altogether. And the faster we can accelerate this work, the better off our employees are going to be, their companies are going to be, and ultimately the economic horsepower of Southeast Michigan and Michigan as a state will improve significantly.
Yeah, you mentioned, there are many people who don't have the opportunity, never got the opportunity, have fallen through the cracks somehow. And certainly it sounds like your equity at work example is something to work towards that, to help those individuals who will now be looking for an opportunity. So I congratulate you on that initiative. That's really, really very important.
Thank you.
We're starting to come down to the end of our time together. So I'd like to give you an opportunity. Is there anything that I haven't focused on that you would like to make sure to share before we end today?
Well, thank you for the invitation, Tammy. I would just welcome everybody to continue to focus within your own organizations on DE&I. Again, speaking from personal experience, I know how important it is to create opportunities for individuals and more people. And I don't have all the answers. Kelly doesn't have all the answers. But working together as a community of like-minded organizations that are invested in the improvement of the condition in which people work and live is a really important mission, and one that is well worth the time that anyone is going to invest in it, as I know many of the members of the chamber do. And so I would just close by encouraging membership to keep up the fight. It's not going to happen in a day. It's going to be a journey, and we're making progress, but we still have a lot of work to do.
Well, thank you, Peter, for sharing your story and your perspectives on leadership, but also just thank you for what is a very clear passion and commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. We need more leaders like you doing that. That'll guide the way so that others will follow. So especially thank you for your leadership in that area.
Well, Tammy,
yeah, no, please go ahead.
If I could, I'd just like to say that ultimately, we're not going to be successful unless more people like me, and I'm talking about white men in leadership positions, take up the banner to act and change and commit to change. It's not going to happen. So we need, and I have learned this in so many stark terms in the last year and a half, that we can't be bystanders. We have to do and help to do the heavy lifting to make this kind of change happen and stick.
So true, and definitely needed if we are going to make progress. I'm going to assume, as CEO of our talent, or chair of our CEO Talent Council, you're spreading that word and will help to make sure that that happens. So thank you again.
Thank you, Tammy.
And again, I'd like to thank Bank of America for sponsoring today's event and our total series of lessons in leadership. Big thank you to all of our attendees who are here today. Please join us again in a couple of weeks for our next Lessons in Leadership. It will be on Tuesday, June 15th at 11 a.m. And at that time, I'll be speaking with Naja Bazi, who is the founder and chief executive officer of Zaman International, and just an amazing woman. So I encourage you to make sure and click in for that. Also, as I mentioned earlier, DetroitChamber.com has all these sessions of Lessons in Leadership. They are recorded, so you can share with others that they can go on and see it, or you can go back and see past sessions. So to everyone who was with us here today, I thank you very, very much, and I hope you have a wonderful day.